Mini episode 191 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by that NBA Lottery Pick, your pop culture influenced look at the world of hoops. Follow them on the web at that NBALotteryPick.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
All right, everybody, welcome to mini episode number 191 of the FDH Lounge. It's the FantasyDraftHelp.com insider for NFL Week 3, Rick Morris and Kyle Ross, breaking down the fantasy action for you here, going through the slate of games. A note at the outset here before we get to this. I certainly want to note this here this week. Somebody where it was a great privilege for me personally at one point in time to be able to interview this guy. One of the real greats of the NFL, one of the legends in the entire history of the game. Steve Sabol, unfortunately passing away this week from a brain tumor at the age of 69. He'd been battling this for about 18 months or so. Everybody was, of course, hoping that he was going to recover from it. Unfortunately, it was not meant to be, and those of us who have known people who've had brain tumors know that's a pretty grim thing to try to come back from. But been a lot of talk this week about the legacy of the Sabols, both Steve and his father Ed, who founded NFL Films. And I was talking off air today to one of our fellow dignitaries, Nate Noy, and I was saying, you know, if you look at it, if you look at the impact in the history of the NFL on this, if you were going to do a Mount Rushmore for the NFL, I've never heard of anybody splitting a bust in there. But if you did one, I think one of the four would have to be half the face of Ed Sabol and half the face of Steve Sabol, because NFL Films is one of the instrumental things here, both in changing how sports on TV was produced and helping, Kyle, something that we always talk about, helping the NFL to pass Major League Baseball somewhere in the 80s and the 90s to definitively become number one in this country.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL, they always talk about how TV-friendly it is, and it certainly is, where, you know, baseball, it's kind of a tough watch on TV. Football's so great. And, you know, I kind of mentioned you off air. One of my favorite things from NFL was those old Super Bowl recaps. I remember there was a
Those
day.
are awesome.
I was really sick. It was obviously around Super Bowl time when they show them. And that helped me, like, I commit to memory, like, all these, you know, people, you know, for I'm just throwing this out there, like Super Bowl 14, most people are like, oh, I wonder who that was. It was Steelers 31, Rams 19.
Yeah.
You know, their fourth Super Bowl. I mean, I can remember things based in large part. Those were great. You know, when they were done in NFL Films, it was just such a tremendous job. I mean, everyone, John Facenda, yeah, with the voice, unbelievably, was very good. But yeah, Steve Sabol was a true pioneer.
Yeah.
In the NFL, and is certainly someone who will be missed.
Yeah, great man. Tremendous privilege to get to talk to him once. I'm saddened because he was talking about some of the things yet to come for NFL Films that are not going to happen during his reign. But some of the things he said to look for, and this was about, what was it, about 18 months ago that he, 2 years, he's been sick 18 months, sorry, a little more than 2 years, whenever it was that he was on. One of the things to look for, Kyle, NFL Films through NFL.com eventually, and he said this was a several-year project, but they're going to be making it so that, I mean, if you want to look up, like, okay, give me every Brian Sipe 300-yard game, you'll be able to search it right through NFL.com. They're going to make it this incredible searchable database through NFL.com.
Oh, wow. That's for someone like me, that's something I would definitely be interested in.
Yeah.
And I won't be the only one.
It's coming. And, you know, I was very excited to hear that, as I think anybody who loves football would be. All right, we'll take a look at the games here for this week, and you know, make some mental notes, Kyle. We'll run through the slate of games here, the fantasy recommendations, and see what you think here as we go through them. Again, we have, as you heard at the outset here, our every week plays for fantasy. The one thing I will say, and I got a question from somebody off air today about Chris Johnson. Again, it hurts what he's done thus far, but this is why we make these guys every week plays if healthy. You cannot afford to hold a grudge in this thing. You will be even more homicidal if he goes off this week after you've benched him in favor of somebody else. You cannot afford to hold a grudge. It would be as though, Kyle Ross, it would be as though if you go back to Reykjavik in 1986, where Gorbachev screwed over Ronald Reagan. It would be as though I would years later refuse to listen to the fine music of Monsters and Men. But I won't do that. I won't cut off my nose to spite my face. I won't pass by the fine ska-flavored offerings of this fine band just because of what transpired at Reykjavik in 1986. Your thoughts, Kyle Ross?
Get with the picks.
I knew I was going to exasperate you with that one. The look on your face is tremendous. Makes me wish we had the
Who should I
cameras
start
back
at
up.
quarterback this week?
Who do you have?
Well, I know I'm starting Cam Newton.
Oh,
I was talking about the people.
All right,
yeah,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, so for the people here and looking at the games, running through these, the entire slate here, game by game. Chicago, St. Louis, the marginal plays, and that's how we define all of these ones, guys who are not at this point considered to be every week starters. Jay Cutler, Michael Bush certainly has got to be at least a borderline every week play in the absence of Matt Forte at this point. Danny Amendola for St. Louis. I'll do him the immense privilege of pronouncing his name right this time and not goofing on it as I so often do. But he's been a receptions machine thus far during the season. Buffalo and the Browns. The Browns are an all-out play in this one, meaning that outside of the gimme of Trent Richardson, there's nobody that we like. For the Bills, we love C.J. Spiller and Stevie Johnson. Dallas, Tampa Bay. Gotta love the combo of Miles Austin and Dez Bryant. Good chance for these guys to get it back going again here. For Tampa Bay, we do like Martin on the ground to be able to get it going. I keep saying, and this is especially relevant for anybody that's in a Cleveland-based fantasy league as we are here. I'm waiting these years for somebody to come up with the fantasy football team name of Doug Martin Superstore. That would be a tremendous one.
That is a good one. That's
here.
very
Yes.
good. I see you working.
Yes.
Okay.
And for anybody outside the area, just Google Martin and Superstore and you'll get it. Indianapolis, Jacksonville. Jacksonville, again, would be all out. Nobody that we like aside from Mo Jones-Drew. For Indy, the combo of Luck and Wayne. For the Jets and Miami here, Reggie Bush on the ground. He should, and also through the air, should be able to get some opportunities against the Jets as he did against Oakland. Sanchez and Helms, that battery going for the Jets. In the San Francisco-Minnesota game, Alex Smith yet again for San Francisco. It's hard to recommend any wide receivers because he's using them all to a fairly decent extent right now. Crabtree the most, but probably not enough to get a recommendation here. Harvin for Minnesota, where we disagree with our friends at Fox Fantasy Freaks here, Mike Harmon, who's been a frequent guest on our show. We disagree about Percy Harvin being an every week play, but we certainly like him here. New Orleans, Kansas City, there's going to be some opportunities here. Sproles and Pierre Thomas, certainly we think for New Orleans on the ground. For Kansas City, Castle, Hillis, and Bowe. They'll probably be going with both Hillis and Charles on the ground in this game, at least as long as they're in it. Detroit at Tennessee. Tennessee being an all-out play. Again, aside from Chris Johnson, as we noted earlier, the obvious play. Brandon Pettigrew for Detroit. For Washington and Cincinnati, RG3, of course, for Washington at this point, along with Alfred Morris and Andy Dalton for Cincinnati in terms of what Washington's given up through the air thus far. Philadelphia, Arizona, don't like anybody in this game, quite frankly. It's an all-out play, particularly with Macklin and Deshaun Jackson being banged up for Philly. San Diego, Atlanta, like Malcolm Floyd for the Chargers, Tony Gonzalez for Atlanta. And that makes Atlanta an all-in play for this week, as we can recommend going with Gonzalez, because just about everybody else on their offense ends up being an every-week play at the skill positions. Houston and Denver, simply the quarterbacks in this one. Matt Schaub, Peyton Manning, a little bit hard to predict among the marginal players aside from that. Pittsburgh, Oakland, for us, Oakland would be all out. Pittsburgh all in. Roethlisberger, Doyer's going to get a good chance to run it up on the ground a little bit here. Antonio Brown and Heath Miller. It's not often we can recommend Heath Miller, but Roethlisberger looks to be spreading the wealth around like a certain Kenyan fella this weekend here. So certainly like that for Pittsburgh.
I'm still paying attention, buddy. Okay, make no mistake about it.
Just testing you. For Baltimore.
I can't believe you. You think I'm going to let you get away with that?
The only question was whether it would take until the end for you to mention that or not. Baltimore, Pitta and Flacco. is the combo to go with, whereas for New England it would be Ridley. And on Monday night, frankly, there's not anybody marginal that we like in the Green Bay-Seattle game. So the all-ins, Pittsburgh and Atlanta, all outs. Cleveland, Jacksonville, Tennessee, Arizona, Oakland, and Seattle. So total this week, including the recommended plays that we had made earlier for the Thursday night game, which, if you check Twitter on Thursday night, were Smith and LaFell for Carolina, the
I like
wide
this
receivers.
Brandon LaFell. I think Brandon LaFell.
I got ragged on in 2 leagues for taking him in the 11th round, Kyle Ross, in
well,
a 12-team league.
Well, I think those other 22 people should be beaten.
They should be. They absolutely should be.
How about that?
With a stick.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure what else you beat people with. I'm certainly not getting my hands dirty.
And Brown and Bennett were the recommended plays, of course, for the Giants. 10 quarterbacks, 12 running backs recommended this week among the marginals, 10 wide receivers, 5 tight ends. So a little bit more depth this week at wide receiver if you've got a flex play to make on these here. So, Kyle, let's circle back around. Anything that seemed particularly noteworthy or objectionable to you aside from my Obama joke?
No, I don't think so. I'll just say this.
Okay.
You started out mentioning Chris Johnson and some comments you'd gotten. Is he still on your all in and stuff?
Yeah.
What about Wes? I always refer to my team. What about Wes Welker? Now there's the injury to Hernandez, which means I know Hernandez is a tight end, Welker's a receiver.
It's still part of the big picture. It's part of that passing game.
Yeah.
They're going to have to apportion things differently.
Let me ask for both of them.
Okay.
When do you abandon ship on both those guys? What is John? Johnson. Here's the thing. Welker was great last year. Johnson wasn't.
Okay.
So I would imagine that Chris Johnson's a guy that is probably downgraded to enough. If he's your number one running back and your number two isn't very good, you're scratching your head.
Yeah.
And hopefully you have some depth.
Mm-hmm.
Receiver, I figure is better, but. What do you think? How many weeks do you want to wait on these guys?
Chris Johnson, even if it's ugly again, I think you got to wait until at least October at this. He's in fine shape physically as far as anybody can tell. It's certainly not a matter of being washed up. He's a guy who came into the league really. The reason that his initial success came as a surprise is because he's a scat back. He's not particularly big, pretty radical that he's not an every week play anymore. In terms of who's the other one?
Wes Welker.
Wes Welker, yeah. Kind of the same thing. And again, Belichick he's a stubborn guy, as anybody who's a Browns fan who remembers the days of diagramming bootlegs for Bernie. He's a stubborn guy. But it's a thing where, by the same token, reality is going to intercede here at a certain point, as you said, with the Aaron Hernandez injury. Things seem to be trending more so in that direction. I've read a decent amount that they want to get the ball more so to Brandon Lloyd. That's fine. But Lloyd and Gronkowski combined cannot make up for Wes Welker being marginalized.
Okay.
It's a thing where I'd said last year, if they'd had a Brandon Lloyd there last year in the way that they envisioned using him, or if Chad Johnson had anything left in the tank, I think they'd have won the Super Bowl. They were very close. If they'd had anything other than the between the hash marks passing game that they had with Welker and with the tight ends.
And ironically, Brady missed Welker.
Yeah.
Or that, whose fault was it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Outside the hashes.
Yeah.
If he catches that,
exactly,
they win their Super Bowl.
Exactly. So if Brandon Lloyd can give them the diversification to go with what they've had, they're a team that, again, with an improved defense, could very well win the Super Bowl this year. So, no, I say patience on both of those, Kyle.
Gotcha. And the only thing I wanted to mention, unless if you have some fantasy.
I got nothing else.
Is just, I neglected to mention this when we were talking about our picks in the other mini episode. Replacement refs are a big thing. And it could tie in with fantasy, too, that it seems home teams are favored, and there's been a lot more scoring with these guys. So, just a quick note, there's been a lot of articles out there with these replacement officials. Home teams are really benefiting, and then it'll be interesting to see because the odds makers have posted higher totals this year on these games. So you may not see, if you're a bettor, that may negate the increase you think is coming with overs. But if a fantasy player, I think there's going to be more scoring until they get rid of these buffoons in every game, almost.
I think so. By the same token, whether it be this or whether it be the handicapping, which we were talking about in our previous mini episode, I'm very leery of anybody trying to ascertain the effects of the refs and trying to game for it because it's chaos theory at this point.
Yeah,
you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it is true. I'm just saying, it just seems. I just wanted to add that in that
right
now people are talking about home teams and overs are the beneficiaries from these replacement
And
refs so far. It's a small sample size, certainly.
I guess that's the difference between. You're right about that on the macro level. There are some things that we can discern maybe league-wide. I'm talking micro level. I'm saying don't look at a game from a handicapping perspective or a fantasy perspective. Well, because of the replacement refs, it's going to be this. Now, the one thing that our FDH Director of Research, Nate Noy, has pointed out to me is, and this is very interesting, that pass interference calls are at an almost historic pace through 2 weeks here, and that is what has helped keep the offense at a level somewhat commensurate with last year when it was pretty much at a rocket pace throughout the season.
That kind of sucks for fantasy pass interference calls. You don't get credit for those. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a perfect example. Macro sense is that vulture backs are more likely to be worth something. You and I have both bemoaned what Michael Turner's given us thus far, and yet you certainly hope that Michael Turner is going to be more than a glorified Leroy Horde, but at least he was able to give us that last week. So to a certain extent, it makes it even harder, I'd say, to write off some of these backs. Not necessarily a Chris Johnson who's a scat back, but any non-scat back feature back is maybe going to have an increased possibility of that. But like I said, be careful about distilling any of the lessons to any one game. I agree with you on this with the refs. It's a bad situation, and any time that you have the refs in a game calling a penalty on a quote-unquote red team, doesn't that say it all?
Yeah.
You know,
I'd call a penalty on a red state, but not the red team, certainly.
Ironically, that was a red team in a red state.
Yeah, there
Kyle
you go.
Ross.
Yes.
All right, what better way to bring that around on? FDH Lounge mini episode number 191. Go knock 'em dead in fantasy this week, and of course, you always will when you're playing with FantasyDraftHelp.com.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the Periodic Table of Elements.